Welcome back, friends, or welcome. Thank you for joining me. And this episode, we are going to talk about if you're grieving the right way. So often I hear people say, like, I'm not grieving the right way, right? Like, I'm the only one who's still struggling with this. So and so lost their mom and they seem to be fine. And so when we think that there's a right way to grieve, that means we think there's a wrong way to grieve. And most of the time, we think that we fall into the wrong category, that we are grieving wrong. Like other people around us are doing it right, and we're wrong. And we do this all the time in different areas of our life with parenting, with weight loss, with fashion, right? Like we look at things that the world shows us and especially now with social media, right? Everything is Instagram perfect. There's all these fun videos on TikTok, and you see your Facebook friends like having the time of their lives, and you think they're doing life right, and I'm doing it wrong. And we know that that's not true based off the evidence that there have been so many documentaries lately about the way that how somebody portrayed their life on social media is not what was actually going on behind the scenes. There's a lot of people that they portrayed like they had this perfect marriage, and then all of a sudden, like, nope, their marriage is done. There was a pretty famous one that's still kind of in the news where she like had, I think it was on Instagram, and how to raise your kids. And it turns out, nope, she got her kids taken away from her because she was abusive. And so we know deep down that these things are all smoke and mirrors, right? But when you're comparing something that feels very personal to you, that you feel like you're the only one who's failing at it, you're the only one who's not getting it right, you start to believe that these things are true instead of remembering that it's smoke and mirrors. And so I just want to talk today about three pretty simple things to remind yourself of when you feel like you are grieving wrong. And so the first one is that grief is not linear. Grief comes and goes all the time. And as the time goes on more, what I have realized, like I'm in year 5 of grief now, it's less frequent and it's less often. Now, I have done a lot of work through getting coached and self-reflection, and I work with other people who help me to get through that. So maybe your year 5 is still very heavy with grief, but everybody's on a different path, a different journey. I also know that, well, now as my kids are getting a little bit older, like it's a little easier because I can have that little bit of time for me instead of constantly being bombarded with other people's needs and not getting sleep at night. And when, especially when we don't get sleep, everything is bad, right? Like when we don't get sleep, it doesn't matter much of anything. Like we can't function. And so just to remember that too. I had a friend who I think it was last year, it was year 10 that her dad had passed away. And she had been fine. Fine as like it came and it went. And there was times where she was sad and times where she thought about him more. But overall, she felt like it was good, except for year 10. Like all of a sudden it hit her all over again that he's not here. I can't ask him these questions. And so maybe that's what my year 10 will look like too. Maybe that's what my year 7 will look like. And it really is dependent on the things, again, that are going on in your life. Like if you have other things that are alternating in your world, a lot of times that can trigger grief because it just brings you back to that place where, oh, like if my mom was only here, if my dad was here, if my brother was here, like what would they say? What would they think? And then you can't ask them questions, right? As you change careers, I changed career in this time, and I wish I could talk to my mom about it. And so in those times, grief was harder. And so it's not a linear process. It's not Okay, check. Like, I've been sad, I was depressed. Now let's move on to the anger. Like, that's not how it works. And so, just to give yourself space to remember that is very, very important. And then the second one is the lies of comparison. And so, no two journeys are the same, right? And that's where you look at somebody and you're like, well, I don't know, her mom died and she seems to be handling it well. But then I often ask myself, like, well, how do I know? How do I know that they're handling it well? Maybe because outwardly things look fine, but how do I know? How do I know that that person's not crying every morning in the shower still? How do I know that in their mind, they're telling themselves so many things of self-loathing and hate and guilt and shame? But just because I looked put together on the outside, like I think that she's handling it fine, that might not be the case. So just remember to not compare yourself to others, and that grief is the comparison, or that comparison is the thief of joy. And it really, really is true because the second you slip into that comparing yourself to others, whether it be comparing what kind of car somebody drives, what kind of clothes they wear, comparing what job and how much they make, right? Or comparing grief journeys. As soon as we slip into that comparison role, our joy slips away. Or maybe what little joy we did have for the day. And then the third one is when you think about, am I grieving right? I want you to ask yourself instead, am I grieving in a way that's right for me? Am I grieving in a way that I'm with God instead of pushing him away, instead of trying to, and I'm not saying you can't get angry, right? Because I've been angry at God, I've been angry with other people, but bringing it back around to just saying, like, I'm angry today. I'm so angry. And so, God, I give that to you today. That's all I really have today is anger. So I'm going to give that to you. It doesn't mean that the anger goes away. It doesn't mean like you instantly feel better. It just means like this is the best that I can show up today. And so, God, like, please help me in that. Right. And I think too, like the time when you'll know if it's right for you or not is when you reach a point where you're like, I can't do this anymore. Maybe for you, it's every single night you're coming home and it started out as one drink and now it's five drinks. Or maybe you still have only one drink, but come 11 o'clock, all you can think about is that drink that you're going to have when you get home. And you think about it all day long, and that's the only thing getting you through the day is knowing at the end of the day, you're going to have that drink. Maybe it's knowing that on the way home, I'm going to stop at Dairy Queen. And I know yesterday I said I wasn't going to, that I was going to stop doing that. But gosh, I deserve it. I'm having a hard day. And so I'm going to stop there again. And you start thinking about it earlier and earlier and more and more. That's when I challenge you to say, okay, like, this is a problem. What I'm using to cope in my grief is not the right way for me because it's harming me. And it's becoming a point where that's all I can think about, right? Like I get sad and then that's all I can think about. Or even now it's the point where I'm not even really that sad, but that's all I can think about. When it becomes that overwhelming, that's all I can think about. And you promise yourself every night that you're not going to do it the next day and that things are going to change, and then they don't. That's when you know that, okay, like I'm not grieving the right way. I'm using all these different things to cope, and it's not really coping. It's now feeding into, borderline addiction. I think almost all of us have some sort of an addiction. I I have a coffee addiction. I have a addiction to sugar. Like once I start eating things, I have a very hard time stopping. And so I know from experience that when that is all you think about, that's what you dream about, that's what you want to do, like that's an addiction. And so, yes, it might not be clinically correct, but you know when you feel that shift internally that, okay, now I'm not grieving the right way. But other than that, everything that sometimes you might see something, maybe it's been 3 years, and you see something that reminds you of your loved one and you start bawling. You're like, oh my gosh, like I didn't think that was going to upset me this much. And it does. Like, that's okay. That's just grief. And there's no wrong way to do that. I said it only becomes wrong when it starts to become bad habits that lead into bad addictions. So if you are kind of in that place where you're like, oh my gosh, like I think that's me, I'm struggling, like I really want things to change, but I don't know how. Every night I go to bed telling myself I'm not going to stop and get brownies, and every day I do, and then I eat them in the car, hiding them, like that's when it becomes a problem. And that is what I'm here for. So you can go to nursegriefcoaching.com to sign up. You can book a free consult call with me, and we can just talk through those things. And you're like, I don't know, like I'm nervous, I'm worried about this, but I don't have anybody to talk to. So I invite you to go do that and book a call with me. We can talk through it. And if anything else, it really just gives you a place to vocalize what you're going through, right? Like when we get things off our chest, oh, like it feels so good. It's so amazing. So, nursegriefcoaching.com, and I'm praying for you guys, and I hope you have the very best possible day that you can.